everyone. I'm Kelsey Stam-Jimenez. I'm with the Mansfield Center, and thank you for coming to our brown bag lecture today. Before I introduce our speakers, Marilyn and Sara, I want to let you know about a couple of things. One is that there are flyers out for our other brown bag lectures. There's a sign up for our email list if you want to get more information about events and other lectures that are happening with the Mansfield Center. As well as if you're a student, there are flyers on our winter session in Vietnam course. So you can check those out after the session. So I'd like to introduce Sara Bates and Marilyn Marler. Marilyn is a botanist here at UM, and she's responsible for natural areas like Mount Sentinel and other areas around. She also serves on the Missoula City Council. Marilyn has been involved with the Seeley Professional Fellows Program for several years, serving as both a professional host, a homestay family, and also a speaker for some of our groups. Sara Bates is the Deputy Director of the Northern Rockies, Prairies, and Pacific region of the National Wildlife Federation, based here in Missoula. Prior to working for NWF, Sara worked for the Center for Natural Resources and Environmental Policy at the University of Montana as well, where she focused on Western water and public resource law policy. So Sara served as a professional host, most recently with a fellow from Laos, and also with Nguyen Van Thai of Save Vietnam's Wildlife, who you'll hear about more today. Take it away. Thanks,
Well, thank you, everybody, for showing up. And this is really it was a fun opportunity when Kelsey invited us to come talk about our two overlapping trips to Vietnam in January, because it's pretty fresh. And Marilyn and I had fun pulling our photos together and sharing some of them, talking about some of the same places that we visited. And we decided to go in this order because there's a kind of a natural segue from one of the spots that we both spent time in. So just for organization's sake, this is what we're planning on covering during this fairly informal and hopefully very interactive time today. You just got a little overview of the Professional Fellows Program, one that we are very enthusiastic participants in, and I think probably a lot of people in this room are fairly familiar. We also have several people who served as homestay hosts for our visitors. Can you raise your hands? Yeah, really appreciate that. That was a very important part of their time here in Missoula, and it's something that I heard about a great deal when I was overseas. And they all told stories about how important that was for their visit. We're going to talk through several different places that we visited, and those as examples of environmental conservation projects and opportunities for partnership with people here in Montana. And I hope that we've tried to plan it to speak in fairly short segments so that we'd have lots of time for questions and discussion. So just for background, I hosted two fellows here with the National Wildlife Federation at our regional office, one from Laos and one from Vietnam. We're talking today just about the Vietnam part of our visit. And so I spent one of my weeks in January in Laos and one in Vietnam. And I spent almost my entire time here at this national park, which is not very far from Hanoi, but it takes a long time to get there because of the roads. It's the first national park that was established in Vietnam in 1962. I believe it's the largest protected reserve in the country, and it's an area of limestone formations, limestone caves, early prehistoric human settlement. This cave that this photo is of has remains that are close to 10,000 years old from people that live there, and it's visited regularly, and it's sort of seen as a spiritual site as well. It's also a place of great biological diversity, and many plant species which Marilyn could talk a lot more about, unusual animal species, and an attempt to really build an ecotourism industry to support the local people. And I would say it's an area where ecotourism is still in its development phase, partly because of the infrastructure. But spent time in this park, and the reason that I was there, the connection to my fellow Thai, was that this park supports 3 different wildlife rescue and rehabilitation centers. And they're managed in cooperation with the park. And in the case of my fellow who was here, one of them is also managed partly by a nonprofit, which is a new kind of an entity in Vietnam. So the first of the 3 wildlife rescue and rehabilitation centers is the Endangered Primate Rescue Center, which was established in 1993 by the Frankfurt Zoological Society. There's a lot of international partnerships in environmental conservation in Vietnam as in other countries. And the woman that directs it is a German woman, and we met her. Did you spend time with her also, Marilyn? And they have been successfully rescuing and doing captive breeding of extremely rare primates. And they run an active volunteer program with international people coming in from all different countries, including the United States, to come in and help do all the work that it takes to rescue and to help these animals survive as a species, and also in some cases to get them ready for release into the wild. This is a picture of a woman doing the daily task is to go out in the forest and collect bushels and bushels of leaves, to collect them, put them together in what they call salads of meals for the primates, and to serve them up for food several times a day. It's a big task, and they do it all the time. The second of the rescue and rehabilitation centers is the Turtle Conservation Center. And the photos here are one of an international volunteer who was there visiting for a couple of weeks while I was there. The second is a turtle that's only found in this part of Vietnam, exceedingly rare. And again, this is a place where they're receiving animals that have been involved in illegal trade. They're very, very valuable in the market. And so the security arrangements around this very remote spot are extreme, with armed guards and with all kinds of alarm systems, because each of those turtles is worth a whole lot of money. And the third of the centers that's there is the Carnivore and Pangolin Conservation Center. And this is a program that's jointly run by the National Park and also by Save Vietnam's Wildlife, which is the nonprofit for which our fellow who was visiting Thai is the executive director. I'll talk a little bit more about his organization in a moment. But the Carnivore and Pangolin Center, again, rescues animals that have been involved in illegal trade, rehabilitates them if possible for release, and in some cases holds them there for educational purposes, animals that can't be released. And they have a lot of people coming through all 3 of these centers who are visiting the park, in addition to the trekking and going to the caves and looking at the botanical reserve. People come and visit these 3 different centers and learn about the threats to rare and endangered wildlife and what can be done. So the carnivores are all different kinds of cat species, and other species that I had not seen before, like the binturong. That was really interesting. And the pangolin, which is the pangolin, several of us have t-shirts with the pangolin, the most illegally trafficked mammal in the world, the only mammal with scales. And this is the mammal that Save Vietnam's Wildlife focuses on. So they are present, again, brought in from the illegal trade, rehabilitated if possible, and released in the appropriate protected habitats in Vietnam. So they're here at this, at the Carnivore and Pangolin Rescue Center. So the organization that we worked in partnership with is Save Vietnam's Wildlife. It's a very young nonprofit. It was just chartered in July of 2014 with the permission of the government, and you need that to be a nonprofit, a non-governmental organization in Vietnam. The mission is to protect and increase populations of threatened wildlife by rescuing threatened animals, protecting entire populations, and ensuring secured habitats. And Ty, who was here as our visitor, is a pretty charismatic and amazing spokesperson for this organization. He's a young man in his early 30s. He is a passionate advocate for this species, for the pangolin, and he travels the world telling people about why they should care about a species that they've never heard of before. When he was here in Montana, he connected with Kate Davis at the Raptors of the Rockies, and this photo is of him at her raptor facility. And the reason he's posing with a penguin is that when he comes here and talks about pangolin, that's the first thing people think he's talking about. And he has to disabuse them of them. And he got very frustrated when he was here, and I was introducing him to people, all the different people that he met with, and he would say, would you tell them a little more ahead of time and let them know what I'm about? And you know, part of what we said was, you know, that's part of your job, is to tell people what you're about and to educate them. And so he was kind of frustrated. He was heading down to Kate's place and thought, here I go again. I'm going to have to tell a raptor person about what a pangolin is. And he gets there, and she had a little figure of a pangolin on her shelf. She was very familiar with pangolins. She also had this sculpture of a penguin that he admired, and so they had to take a picture of the pangolin and the penguin, saying that he had bridged that understanding divide with her. But Ty learned a lot while he was here, and he learned a lot about what he came here to learn about, which was running a nonprofit, raising money, being an effective advocate for wildlife. And he also learned things that he didn't expect to learn. In Vietnam, there is no legal hunting of wildlife. All the hunting is done in this for the illegal trade. So it's for medicine, for food. Those are the two primary drivers of illegal trade, and it's really destructive. There are, you know, it's a species like the pangolin. The survival is really not guaranteed in the wild. And so he came here with a very strong opinion about hunting, and it colored his view. And his host family took him out to Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for a visit. And he found that he was staying with National Wildlife Federation, which is a sportsman-based conservation group. But I think it was the visit to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation was really an eye-opener for him. And as he went walking through the visitor center, there was a big sign that said, "Hunting is conservation." And I think it just floored Ty. And he read it, he had his picture taken by it, he blogged about it, he came back and talked about it. And at the time, he really just was saying, I don't get that. That's very strange. That's unfamiliar. But we talked a whole lot about the role that sportsmen have played in recovering species that were decimated by market hunting more than 100 years ago, and the role that building constituencies like that has played in successful conservation in the United States. And it was very interesting to me when I was in Vietnam with him and with his organization, and I was going to speak to the embassy, to a group at the embassy in Hanoi, and Ty said, talk about hunting, talk about that, tell that story. And really, because that's a very hard lesson to convey appropriately and not say you should do like we did. But Ty really had taken it in, digested it, and was seeing it as an important lesson to be learning from. So this continued as part of our week together, was conversations about his encounters here. So thank you to the Woods for taking him to Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. That was an important moment for him.
What was that middle picture?
Was there a question?
Yeah, the middle picture, is that?
That is a very small pangolin, and the feeding is at night. They're nocturnal, and I got to go observe a feeding at night, and that's the handler holding his hand out, and they're very curious little creatures with no fear of people, and it came and put its foot up, and the lighting's not very good. It was with my phone in the dark, or with a little bit of light. Yeah. So it's big times for pangolin right now, and this week in particular. Was there a question? Oh, thank you. We are coming up on World Pangolin Day on February 20th. In celebration of that, the Save Vietnam's Wildlife has opened its big education center right here in the park, the same location. They're releasing 15 pangolins out in a protected area in the country, which is a very big deal. And in celebration of the Pangolin Day, Secretary of Interior Sally Jewell is going over and appearing. The ambassador, the American ambassador, is showing up. So they're gaining in importance. And happily, Ty has also been recognized for his good work with an international conservation award from the Future for Nature organization based in the Netherlands. And he got a big bunch of money, and he's getting publicity as a top conservationist. So I do think participating in the program and his international connections have been very helpful to encourage this. While I was there, this is the main office of Save Vietnam's Wildlife, and we held a workshop. We also did a lot of conversations about building a nonprofit, board structure, fundraising. This was a workshop that we held, and the big screen in that room was financed by the fellows, the Mansfield's grants program, which was through this program. They're very proud of it, and it was very helpful. You'll notice that we're all bundled up. It was the coldest winter in 40 years in Vietnam, and it was so cold. I haven't been that cold in a long time. I had to borrow layers, and there's no heating in the building. So we were all bundled up, but we had a great interactive time together. So I'm going to conclude and turn this over to Marilyn after I just tell you about on my very last day with Ty, he took me to another nature reserve, which is the Van Long Wetland Nature Reserve. A beautiful, beautiful place, a wetland karst landscape with limestone mountains and caves. It's a productive farming area, has been for a very long time, and an important cultural site where people have been living, traveling through, and interacting for centuries. In 1993, scientists realized that there was a unique population of primate, the Delacour's langur, and today the only viable population of that species is in this nature reserve. And part of the strategy of protecting this species is by enabling local people and engaging them in ecotourism to bring visitors in on the water and into the limestone caves to see the langurs when they're out. And I did not get to see one. That's not my photo of a langur jumping. But some people are lucky and get to see them. It was too cold for us. But these are these tour boats. They go up and down this river and into the caves. And they gather at the edge of the village, and they get the money directly for these rides. It's all negotiated and managed. This was our tour guide who took us. He was fabulous. And this is Ty, our fellow, with me. It was his first selfie, he said, ever. So and these are the tour boats right here. Along the way, you go up the river and then around the corner, and the caves are back behind there. So Marilyn, why don't you take it on?
Yeah, in just a second. Wait, I wasn't counting on the wardrobe change.
Marilyn, I was going to just ask, what makes the penguin so valuable, that it's endangered? So is it medical? Or
It's both. The scales are used in traditional medicine, the scales,
okay.
And the meat is eaten as a high status illegal food. And both are equally important in the illegal trade. Part of the advocacy that Save Vietnam's Wildlife is doing has been successful to take the scales, payment for the scales, off insurance. It was actually covered by insurance, and it's no longer. So that's going to help. But raising awareness about the fact that it has no proven actual benefits, and then raising awareness about how damaging the meat trade is for the species is what they're trying to do. And I do bring, I'll pass this around, this is our magazine, National Wildlife. We've helped publicize the plight of the pangolin in a story that's also available online. I can pass it around.
Thanks for the chance to come and talk about this, and thanks everyone for coming, friends, students, my boss here. I spent time at those wonderful the rescue centers in Phuoc Phuong National Park also, and I spent time talking with the staff of the national park about their ecotourism program, which is really well developed compared to some other national parks in Vietnam. And I spent a lot of time looking at the interpretive systems of those parks and the rescue centers. But I'm going to spend most of my time talking about work I did in southern Vietnam. But I am very excited that we were able to use the Van Long Ecotourism Project as a transition point, because most of what I'm going to talk about is that education is really important for conservation, no matter where you're working in the world. And when done properly, tourism, nature-based tourism, can be really valuable for education too, and provide other benefits like income, et cetera. I wasn't able to go with Ty to this project. I went with a woman who's the executive director of the Primate Rescue Center. We did see the Delacour langur, and I got a terrible picture of it with my iPhone, which I'm not going to share with you. But it was really interesting to hear about how this langur was found there, and that ecotourism is thriving, and there's even a chance that this could be the next national park in Vietnam because of all these things. Is there another slide here? No. Okay, I should have been using my mic switch time to switch to my slides too. Thanks. So this was my third trip to Vietnam, and I just can't say enough wonderful things about the Mansfield Center and the Waisili program. I did my first Waisili exchange was to Can Tha, and I spent time in Cat Tien National Park, which is really close to Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon, which the Southerners still call it Saigon. And then last March I was there on a Fulbright fellowship, and then this was a chance to go and interact with Ty, who I worked with when he was here a little bit. And I just recently found out that one of my colleagues from this part of Vietnam is going to be coming to Missoula this spring, and she works in environmental education, so it's just turning into this great, wonderful Missoula Vietnam network. And I'm learning so much, and I hope that they're learning so much too. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump from Van Long Nature Reserve ecotourism down to Dong Nai Biosphere. Wait, I need assistance. There we go. So Cat Tien National Park is part of a bigger protected area, which is Dong Nai Nature and Culture Reserve. Or both of those together make up the Dong Nai Biosphere. And then there's a buffer area around it that includes farms and towns. And the biosphere designation is like an international designation that this area is really important for culture and conservation. And I did work in both areas on this. And this is a picture from an elephant watchtower where I'm hoping you can see off in the distance is Cat Tien National Park, which is really well-preserved old forest that mostly somehow survived all the bombing and defoliation of the war. But then in between where I'm standing and Cat Tien National Park, there's all these replanted tree systems because they're working real actively to reforest it. And that is a pretty exciting thing to see. And then there's also farms peppered in and out, which is an interesting conundrum because there's a lot of conflicts between elephants and other wildlife and people trying to live there and grow farms. But there's a whole 20-year plan to expand what's the mature forest and what's the quality wildlife habitat. And there are amazing animals in this area. And people don't know about it. It's really close to Ho Chi Minh City, but the international tourism group and a lot of universities, et cetera, don't know that there's this amazing resource that's very accessible from Ho Chi Minh City. Conservation issues in the Dong Nai Biosphere area include wildlife trafficking. That's a $4 billion a year industry for pets, meats, medicines, et cetera. And it's like constant all the time in Vietnam. People are poaching animals. Illegal use of forest products like trees and orchids and different things in there. There was quite a war history that impacted wildlife there. We think a lot about the human impacts, but there were also wildlife impacts. They have invasive plants. This is something I spend time thinking about a lot. I do not spend much time in my normal life thinking about conflicts with elephants, but that's a big deal there. Deer, and that's not, I don't even have that much sympathy when people have problems with deer eating their plants. I know it's annoying, but it's not like an elephant coming through and ripping up your whole year's crops. You know, it's a very serious issue. And that's what Ms. Yen, who's coming later this spring, you'll see me with a tiny Vietnamese woman. She works on human-elephant conflicts in environmental education. I don't like to show pictures of abused animals or captive animals, but this tree came to an untimely end. This is a kind of a rare tree in an old-growth forest in Cat Tien National Park, and the wood is so valuable of this tree that people will go and cut down the entire tree, and they can only, because it's so dense, carry out one little sliver at a time. So maybe they kill the whole tree and they only get a little piece. But people are so poor, and you know, it's tough there. So my friend, Mr. Dot, in this picture is a forest ranger, and they try to equally protect plants and animals of the forest, and it's not easy. Very difficult. There are, I could tell a lot of sad things that are happening in Vietnam conservation. There are a lot of success stories there, and I just want to highlight some of those. In Cat Tien National Park, they did the very successful reintroduction of the Siamese crocodile, which is an animal that was extinct in the wild, and now there's a huge population of them in Cat Tien National Park. They've also reintroduced many, many yellow-cheeked gibbons, which are doing fine in Cat Tien National Park now, another success story. And both of those success stories are tied closely with ecotourism projects. I actually like to say nature tourism more than ecotourism because people will call anything an ecotourism project these days, and I feel like there should be some standards that it includes education and conservation, so I try to say nature tourism. In Dong Nai Nature and Culture Reserve, they have had a lot of success with their aggressive reforestation of native trees, so that's good. And they have a lot of success with their cultural tourism. So that was it's called the Dong Nai Nature and Culture Reserve because it was an important war zone and strategic area. And they have a lot of sites that are interpreted for the war history, and they're a little creepy. Like they have mannequins of like guerrilla fighters and different war scenes played out and different war artifacts. But those are very popular for domestic tourists to come and visit. And they have a whole well-run tourism program catering to the domestic tourists. And it is interesting. I've been to some of those sites, and it's intense and unusual for me to see something like that, but it's important. What? There are some tunnels too. It's not one of the major tunnel sites, but there are some of the tunnel sites that you can go into. So regarding two of the success stories, this is Crocodile Lake in Cat Tien National Park, where all those crocodiles are. It's a popular tourism destination, and popular is relative. Not that many people go there. You have to trek in by foot, and you have to know about it, which is not easy because there's no information about it on the website, which is one of the things I'm working with the park about. But it's beautiful, and there's a ranger station there where you can stay, and rangers are there. And then the yellow-cheeked gibbons, this is a female and a baby, and they're doing quite well. And the park is partnering with a primate rescue center just outside the boundary, and they have guided treks where you can go and see the gibbons. Hopefully, if you're lucky, they don't promise you're going to see them, but you wake up every morning in Cat Tien and the gibbons are singing, and it's this whole thing. People know that there's gibbons there. There's a lot of other amazing things in the park that people don't know about, and I think that they could do a lot more for Vietnam and for the park if they develop that a little bit more, and that's what I'm trying to work with them on. So ecotourism can be a big help for conservation when done appropriately with with conservation as the goal. For example, it can provide income like we saw in Van Long. In this picture, this is my friend Carla, who's from Missoula. Some of you might know her. She's been living for 6 months in Dong Nai as the resident English teacher. And she came on some of the outings with me. And this is Mr. Trong, who's a local guy who's a nature guide. And that reminds me too that we did some projects in Dong Nai and Cat Tien, and they have different issues because they're administrative differently, and there's a lot of government bureaucracy there, like there is in any government. But Dong Nai has really good tourist industry, but no nature guides, and Cat Tien has some really outstanding nature guides, but no framework and administration for the tourism industry. So it's like they need to get together and talk about that. Conservation can also benefit from tourism. In Cat Tien, where they have the tourists going is where there's more eyes in the forest. A lot of the guides are also rangers and have guns or something to scare off criminals, which is a common occurrence. And it's just harder to steal something out of the forest if you know there's going to be tourists coming by all the time. And education is important too. Every time I go on a nature tour in America or abroad, I always learn something because the world is amazing. So we're talking about content for these tours and what, a lot of people grow up there, they don't know that we don't have langurs or we don't have these same issues. So my goal in Dong Nai and Cat Tien was to help work with the park staff, who are amazing. Both park staffs are amazing, to develop some products that they could just use to take to the next step for their ecotourism programs. And we wanted to develop some things that would target the foreign tourist market, because tourists are trying to go there, can't find information, not enough activities to keep them there. They need to be nature-based and educational. highlight and engage conservation efforts, and we wanted to include local communities, which is absolutely key. There's a lot of poverty in the area, and that's what's pressuring people to use the forest illegally. And we wanted to use existing resources, not something like, oh, and you're going to build a 3-story tree house, and then they're going to ride in on a, we wanted to use things that they already have and just tweak it a little bit and change the content. And the staffs were really excited to work with us. Just on this trip, these are some of the animals that I saw. A slow loris, hornbills, a black-shanked duke, which is a very rare primate, civets. This is a deer mouse, like actual size. No, I don't know, it's a little bit bigger than that. And crazy birds. There's a lot of other animals that you could see, but I feel like people don't even know that you can go so close to Ho Chi Minh City and see these amazing things. And it's, they're not going to last forever. We have to work with them. Okay, my time is okay. So we had some challenges that we all knew we were up against, and this is what we're trying to work on. So we needed to do some staff training. It's different to do nature tours versus cultural tourism, and the administrative focus is different. Actually, the focus of Cat Tien National Park has not ever been tourism. It's specifically a conservation mission, so they're trying to update a little bit and get with that, and the director is really open to this, and that was enjoyable. And then there's language barriers and cultural barriers to marketing and just teaching. The English capacity is not good, but it's improving. Some people are really good with English and other people are struggling to learn. And unfortunately, I kind of feel like, well, it's so imperialist of me to think that they have to learn English. But being practical, like we're not all going to learn Vietnamese to go there for a trip. There's 92 million people in the world that speak Vietnamese, and that's a lot, but this is a real, unfortunately, English is the international language. There's also some really interesting cultural issues, like some of the park staff were afraid, like, well, if we say that this is an elephant tour, or that they're going to go to Crocodile Lake and they could see these animals, then people are going to be really mad if they don't see the animals. And so it's a little bit of just discussion about what are people's expectations when they go somewhere to see, to go on an elephant tour. Then you're not going to be mad if you don't see the elephant. You might be slightly disappointed, but there's other things to see in the forest. So, different conceptual framework. This was our team for the Dong Nai tours, and this is actually the vice director of tourism, who was a great sport. A guy who was in my class last March, who's pretty high up in tourism, and this is Mr. Chung, who's the staff botanist, so I was psyched that he came with us. And we worked out this tour, but then the next step is like, they're not the tour guide, so what's the next step to do this? But we had a good time. We put together a 5-day, 4-night itinerary with wildlife viewing and cultural interactions, and we did camping, we stayed at a ranger station, and we stayed in a community-run guest house. Good times, hiking with our rifles out in the forest. Picking up trash, and one of the rangers who came with us said, we did a decompression afterwards, what was everyone's favorite part, what could have been better. He's like, I've never seen anyone pick up garbage in the forest before, that was amazing. And now he feels like he might actually pick up trash. If you've ever traveled in Southeast Asia, wonderful place, but because they haven't had packaged products as long as us, they don't have the sophisticated trash disposal systems that we do, so it's a lot of litter in the forest. So that was really interesting, and we packed out a lot of litter. So it looks like we're just having fun and drinking tea and meeting the village elder, which we did, but there's like a lot of training and notes and planning that went into all of this. Side note, Vietnamese people always dress very modestly and formally, except for a few hours in the afternoon when men can be in their underwear. It's really hot, so then in the afternoon you can just, be relaxed. So this fellow was the very wonderful chief ranger of the backcountry ranger station where we stayed. Delightful. And you should dress modestly. Don't wear shorts and stuff when you go to Vietnam. Cover up. This guy is almost 100 years old, and he's the village patriarch of one of the towns in the buffer area where they have a community-run guest house, and we stayed there. It was a great project. We also worked with, this is my several years contact at Cat Tien National Park, the head scientist, Dr. Khan, who has been to Missoula, and then some of our forest rangers who would be key in putting together some of the tours to the less accessible parts of the park, like where people might go. There are no elephant tours yet, but we're talking about it. In Cat Tien, we put together an itinerary that had biking and trekking. We went to all different kinds of places. We stayed at a farm stay and a different community lodge and another guard station. Spent time just looking at all different kinds of nature in addition to animals. I never got any good pictures of animals because I just take my iPhone with me. But a lot of time of people enjoying things in the forest. And the food is amazing, of course. Another cultural issue between some of the tourism departments at these parks is that in Vietnam it's not common tourist activity to do anything that requires exertion, like biking and trekking are not popular activities, because why would you do that if you had any free time and money? Why would you walk or bike? You know, we're a wealthy country in America, and that's not how you choose your leisure time if, you know, having a motorbike is new or you know, want to have leisure time. So we put together these itineraries with a specific message, like people want to come and have exercise and spend time outside. It's not getting there quickly, it's doing things differently. Yeah.
A couple of the sites that I went on to look at basically where the tourists are coming from, a number of the tourists are coming in from China. What's the difference between what the Chinese want to come and see and do and what American tourists want to come and do?
You know, I don't know. I didn't encounter much of the Chinese tourist scene. I really didn't, and I think it was because maybe I was trying to work with these parks to do the nature tourism, and I didn't hear anything about what Chinese people are coming to do. Maybe they're going on temple tours or something different. A lot of the tourism in Vietnam is around history and culture and religion. So the nature tourism is just not as developed. Even Thailand has far more developed nature tourism than Vietnam. So yeah, sorry, that's interesting. Okay, so then we had a lot of debriefing and planning before and after, just so you think it wasn't all tea drinking. And what I'm working on now, well, the outcome is that we have a couple of usable itineraries that can be changed around. So really there's like 3 or 4 different itineraries that are almost ready to go and be marketed for people to use. We've identified some things for them to work on for internal training. I'm writing up tour descriptions so that it can just be on the internet or they can distribute them at the park center. And now we have developed some interagency support for elephant tourism, which is a big deal. That's all I'll say, it's a big deal. It wasn't embraced initially. And we need beta testers for these tours if you want to be the guinea pig Western tourist to go and try it out. Carla and I and the park and Dan Spencer and Nikki Fear have mentioned that they would like to take students to Cat Tien National Park in the future as part of the class that they do there. But I would like to take some people to go and try out these itineraries. So be in touch. If this kind of thing sounds like fun, let's talk. But I'm going to stop there and hopefully Sara can stand up and we can have some discussion about projects.
Questions?
You know, the tourism part of it is always nice, but you know, I think some people like myself, you'd like to go there and maybe besides just see a bunch of stuff, feel like you were doing something useful.
Yes.
You know, I mean, strange as it seems.
Yes.
But so that part of it would interest me a little more too.
I'm so glad that you said that because I felt like that is true. I'm not surprised to hear somebody say that, but I'm glad to hear you say it. And there are a lot of service projects that could be done.
Those volunteer programs at the Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Centers, they all depend on these cycling tourists that come in, I mean cycling through in time. And lots of them come for a week or two and work really hard. And others come for longer and bring their professional expertise. There was a woman who was a consultant with Save Vietnam's Wildlife. They actually were transitioning between 2 professional people who were there for extended periods. And the woman who was coming in fresh, who I worked with a lot, was a communications expert and will be there for a year. So she's in residence. But there were all these young people coming through and working as volunteers with the animals and learning and obviously being accommodated by the programs and having a great experience.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about it, but Cat Tien National Park also has a wildlife rescue center with a volunteer program, and there's invasive species issues that can be that need to be addressed. There's all kinds of things because I think that you know, there's different things that people call ecotourism. Like I went to some place in Costa Rica. I had a great trip in Costa Rica, but it ended at like an eco lodge on the ocean, and it was pretty deluxe. You know, it's like, oh, this is my contribution to conservation in Costa Rica, is staying at a swank hotel. Didn't know it was that swank when we booked it. But I would rather do something else. I'd rather be out hiking and sweating and, you know, interacting with people, doing a homestay. And I think that that's who these itineraries would. You have to know your market, and that is, I think that doing a service project would be a good inclusion in this. Yes.
There seems to be a tension within the Vietnamese government in terms of protection of the environment. So you have identified some projects that are really high profile and worthwhile. But in other areas of Vietnam, global capitalism is sort of triumphant, and international hotel chains build on the edges of important ecosystems and basically destroy them. So on one hand, you've got things that are incredibly destructive, and on the other hand, you have the kind of projects that you described. So how does this tension get resolved, or is it not going to get resolved?
Do you want to take that one?
I mean, we can bring our lessons, and I ended up talking, I guess this is more in Laos. I told a lot of stories about the Milltown Dam removal. I'm involved in the Clark Fork Coalition. A lot of my work on nonprofits I brought to Vietnam was from my experience in board governance there. But I was just telling the basic story about decisions that were made in the past based on economic concerns alone and disregarding the communities and the environment, and what we've had to do to recover from that to take care of a valued resource. And that was a really interesting story. And I had pictures on my phone, or I'd pull something up and we'd talk about it. I do think telling stories about consequences of decisions that have been made adjacent to national parks or other areas that don't have as much protection, you know, that stories work pretty darn well. In terms of the conflict there, the other example from Cook Phong was that Ty told me that they actually run a captive wildlife, like a wildlife farm within the park. The park agency people are involved in breeding wildlife for the market. So, I mean, there are other places where they had trouble finding protected areas where it was okay to release pangolins because it would be so much work for the rangers to do enforcement. They were actually not getting permission to release them in protected areas. So, yeah, I mean, even just within the agencies that are charged with protection.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that conservation is not a priority at every level in the government, and that's why I'm really excited to work on some of these projects at CAT-TN. Like they have the farm stay program and they have the community longhouse program that are adjacent to the park, and they had a lot of foresight to set those up. But then now it's not getting to the next step. But you know, it's like we built these projects and no one's coming. So maybe what we should do is have a Radisson. I mean, they didn't say that, but I would really like to demonstrate to the park and the adjacent communities that these are going to be successful projects, and it needs to start happening so that the word gets out, because this park will talk to other parks, and you know, there's some parks that, you know, foreigners never go to. You don't even know where they are, and they could benefit too.
You know, Bonnie Buckingham showed up. She was in Vietnam right before I was there, and I think overlapping
That's
with
right,
you.
on agriculture.
And Bonnie was visiting all kinds of farms and agricultural operations, and probably looking at some of these same issues. I don't know if you have anything to add based on these questions that have come up. But is there a tourism building up around organic farming or
There
that
is,
side of
and
things?
it's small, but there is definitely some interest. And some of the people that had come here and had witnessed some of the agritourism that is happening in this area were very interested in developing that in their communities as well, and talked to a number of, I went to Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, and in each one of those countries there was a real interest in sort of finding out how to market best to foreign tourists, because they do see the value in that, and that people are very interested in coming and learning and working and really sort of capitalizing on that interest.
It'd be nice to
So-
keep that connection open between the nature tourism conversations and the agro.
Yeah, I'm sure there's overlap in who would be interested in those.
And really helping to build organics and sustainably grown, which is very small. And they've lost a majority of that in their communities. And so to help kind of bring that back and provide some economic benefit. Yeah.
I think Shanti had a question, and then
Yeah, I was just curious, since the tourism base isn't developed the way they want it to be yet, where does most of their funding come from to maintain their parks and programs and do new projects?
they do have some domestic tourism, a lot more than foreign tourism, which generates some money, but then they just have budgets from the federal government.
Oh, so even so, are they NGO, but they're getting budgets from the federal government, or the NGO is separate?
Oh, sorry, I was talking about the national park and the Nature and Culture Reserve, but Ty,
Ty runs his own operation.
Yeah.
But the rescue and rehabilitation centers are partly, I mean, they're various combinations of government programs through the park.
Okay, so it's mostly them.
And through international wildlife conservation. A lot of money comes in partnership with zoos, because the idea is to maintain genetic diversity and maintain species and recover species. So the foreign zoos are really important to all of these centers, and they're very active participants.
and that's another reason why they would like to have more foreign knowledge and understanding and visitation to their parks, because yes, we have income. Yes, we're interested and can tell stories to other Western countries, but then these international partnerships for funding, professional expertise, et cetera, is all really important too. In Dong Nai Biosphere, they have a big partnership with the Denver Zoo on the elephant conflict. Like, their elephant education program is funded by the Denver Zoo. And there's a wildlife rescue center in the park that's funded by a German nonprofit. And then the primate one is a British nonprofit. So they're pulling from a lot of different partnerships, and they need that. They're smart people and they know a lot of stuff, but they need extra help and capacity to get these things going.
Where do the tourists come from?
I met a lot of tourists from America, Australia, and it seems like the Dutch are traveling people. Maybe it's just the time of the year, but those are the main places that I met them from.
German and English.
German and
people
English.
from The northern part of Vietnam.
A lot from Australia.
And the English people were in the bus. They were getting off the bus very briefly, but while they were in the park, they were going to go visit the rescue centers. That was very interesting, but they weren't going to go trekking.
You didn't mention either Chinese or French places.
But she made the distinction between visiting these natural areas versus the cultural sites. I didn't run into French.
I didn't either, but there's a completely different tourism circuit if you're in Hanoi or Saigon going to temples and stuff. That's different. Like, I think that's a different crowd, and I didn't spend much time at those sites. And Dan, you had a question?
Well, I just wondered if you could talk to me more about potential tensions between increasing the tourism component and the conservation work, because with Ransom and other folks here, we visited Chongqing National Park, which is a set up for the Soros Crane Reserve originally, and it was my third visit there. There have been 2 years between visits, and I couldn't believe how much development has happened in the 2 years I was last there for tourism. And one of the things that I was concerned about is they were saying that increasingly their conservation budget is now being shifted to be supported by tourism revenues, which has positive potential, but when you see, these are oftentimes kind of like postage stamp size natural reserve areas anyway, they're not that large, and when you keep adding increased infrastructure to support tourism. So one of the things we noticed, is that Vietnamese love motors. It seems like, using motorbikes, motor boats, things like that, and there was quite a bit more motorboat traffic through Chongqing this time than I had remembered before. Also, I think there's oftentimes real differences between domestic tourism expectations, what the Vietnamese want when they go, and international tourists when they're. But I was fairly alarmed this time of visiting Chongqing about the increasing impact. And I'll give you one example. They had done major dredging of the canals of the park there because of the drought recently. But the primary reason was to make sure the tourist boats could get back in there. But when they dredge in that area, then they hit the pyrite soil. You may be familiar with this whole problem with the pyritic soil there that's reduced acidification. So they were having real problems with their fish population there, but it was, again, they were dredging because they had to increase the tourism, increase the budget for conservation. And I just worry about, you know, it was kind of lovely to see the photos of Catan being relatively undeveloped, because other places are.
Yeah, no, it's a very real problem. It could go the wrong direction really quickly. And I've been to Tramchim National Park, and it's very small. I mean, you're never in Tramchim, and you can't see the outside of Tramchim. And it's all by boat. So, I mean, it's definitely a balance. I don't know what else to add to what you said. I mean, you characterized it really well. And I hope that in Cat Tien they're not adding any more infrastructure in the park. I mean, it should be existing things outside. And I hope that they will say keep the focus on the conservation and then add tourism as appropriate towards those goals, and I know that it's possible to do that. But then another layer on that is the different expectations of domestic versus international tourists, because Vietnamese people like to go in big groups and have a dinner party, and like singing is really important, and it's just a very different experience. They don't go and like quietly walk around the woods alone like we do. They think that's kind of a weird activity. So, I mean, it is a little bit. Yeah, I know.